Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the special meeting for the tabling of the 2020 budget, the Ottawa Police Services Board, Agenda 14, for Wednesday, 6th of November 2019. I'd like to start with the confirmation of the agenda, that the Ottawa Police Services Board confirm the agenda of the 6th of November 2019. Is that confirmed? Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, the first item of business is the 2020 draft operating and capital budgets, and we have a presentation on that.
Right. Okay, well, thank you very much, Chair. Appreciate it. Board members, Mayor. I'd like to thank my team who did the heavy lifting on this. Point out especially Steve Bell as the interim chief who guided the organization's efforts. Obviously Jeff Letourneau and the entire finance team that reached out and across the organization, made sure they stayed true to the board's direction and strategic priorities, and ultimately have made a number of updates over the last 7.5 days since I've arrived in order to provide a little bit more of a finer point on it. I'll just ask you to advance the slide. Okay, great. So just a rough agenda. I will only be speaking in the first part of it, giving context and operational priorities. Turn things very quickly over to Jeff, who will walk you through the rest of the process, the actual operating budget, the draft operating forecast, and then the draft capital budget and forecast, and then timelines for implementation. Next slide, please. I suspect much of this will be very familiar to you. It's becoming more familiar to me in my new role. The changing landscape of Ottawa, increasing demographic diversity, with marginalized, underserved communities, sometimes over-policed communities, experiencing more complex social justice needs. Increasingly, there's a more sophisticated set of threat actors out there, predominantly leveraging technology in new and exciting ways every single day. I opened my Hotmail account to see a very, very professional-looking Revenue Canada notice saying that I was receiving a $620 refund. And if I clicked on this link, I could start to get the check. That wasn't the right thing to do. But increasingly, these threat actors are also involved in guns and gangs, traditional organized crime, and are involved in international crimes that are taking place here locally. The investigators are challenged to find witnesses, secure access to information, and prosecute effectively. Wrapped around that is our ability to use technology to serve and protect the community, things like CCTV cameras, facial recognition, around which increasing privacy and cyber protections add more complexity and sometimes more cost. The geography, which I remain incredibly impressed and have yet to fully travel across the entire city, Mayor, but I'm doing my best to go from Toronto to Calgary to Vancouver to Montreal to Edmonton. 2,796 square kilometers, 83 kilometers wide, 80% rural and 20% urban, which requires very customized and different approaches to policing while having a centralized control and accountability system. And then finally, and not least, decreasing police to population ratio. At this point, 1 officer to every 549 residents, with a 12% population growth over 2011 to 2018. I'm going to bridge from that last point to the next slide. Oh, we're a little bit out of order for me, but sure, no worries. We'll just break for commercial for a second, if you don't mind. This was one of my last-minute switches on the team, so I'm the one to blame for this, Chair. Okay, well, while they're finding the slide, let me continue on. I'll speak to the numbers and then they'll magically appear and then you can have something to highlight with. I use the police to population number with some reservation. I understand it's a key metric, not just here in Ottawa, but across the country. But it often doesn't tell a full and rich enough story. Once that slide comes up, you will see one of my concerns is making sure that we're benchmarking Ottawa against similar types of jurisdictions. Certainly those who have a better police-to-population ratio, there we go, places like Montreal, Edmonton, Winnipeg, Vancouver, Toronto, Calgary, and even to a degree Peel, are primarily urban centers. And so population density creates a different dynamic in terms of police service delivery and relative effectiveness and therefore resourcing. Regions like Waterloo, York, Durham, Halton, and I would to some degree at this point say Ottawa, which is a very healthy mix of rural and urban, have different levels of density and therefore different dynamics around police to population, relative effectiveness and resourcing. At this stage of my tenure, I'm not prepared to make any other analysis beyond that, except to say we need to be really careful when using any metric to make sure we're putting it as close to context as possible. I am at this point more confident to look at the Violent Crime Severity Index, which is the final column, and where Ottawa rates at the lowest end, almost at the lowest end on police to population, we are at the higher end in terms of the Violent Crime Index. And my only comment there is clearly there's some good work going on in this city, largely by the men and women of the Ottawa Police Service, but equally by their partners and the men and women in the community who work with us, because we are able to suppress crime and in many cases in suppressing, conduct successful investigations and prosecutions. So we're early days in me getting my head around the numbers and being able to reflect my thoughts around that. I've had some great inputs, but certainly there is no doubt. The city has grown at a faster rate than the number of officers. There is increasing pressure for us to be smarter and use our resources better, and this budget represents the latest effort to reach that level of efficiency and effectiveness. If we go to the next page. Board strategic plan, which I fully embrace, as does my command team and throughout the organization. Number one bullet point for me still remains number one, and I'll get on that a little bit later on. Supporting our members in all that it means, from recruiting the right quality and quantity and diversity in the organization, to making sure they're properly coached, trained, developed, deployed, held to account, rewarded, and when necessary, sanctioned. But most importantly, their wellness and their morale, and I'll touch on that a little bit later on. Advancing community policing, and that's not policing a community, that's policing in a community, with a community, for a community. And again, focusing particularly on one aspect of a broad range of community policing activities, but neighborhood policing being one that I think has equal value and is equally anticipated, desired on both halves of the equation, officers wanting to be in that position, supported by the full organization, and community members wanting officers doing that type of particular activity within their communities. Modernizing the work environment, and that's everything from the application of technology through to good business processes to just quite frankly how we treat our members with respect and dignity. And then making meaningful progress on equity, diversity, and inclusion both inside the organization and in how we approach our duties within the community. Next page. This is me writing my notes on a screen, so sorry for the bad PowerPoint protocol. So what does it mean to invest in our members? Investing significantly more in member morale, wellness, health, both physical and mental, and their safety, because if they're not right upstairs, they won't be right when they go out physically into the community and won't be able to keep the community safe. I also mentioned in addressing misconduct, and that's not just by using a hammer, but trying to find ways to reorient members who are acting aberrantly, unethically, getting them back into the right framework, getting them back into the police service and operating at the highest levels. Addressing workplace harassment, which unfortunately is a reality within our organization, within the justice institution, and ultimately where there is unethical or criminal conduct, taking appropriate action. I'll just take a pause and just get off script for a second. This is my 8th day in office since I was sworn in. I have had a large number of meetings internally with our members. I have seen a lot of things in policing in 30 years, and I've mentioned before that I've done policing across the world. I have yet to have an experience as I've had in the last week and a half. There's a level of emotional tension in this organization that I've not experienced in any organization, private sector or public sector. It is affecting members individually, and it's affecting them collectively. I'm not laying the blame or pointing a finger at anybody. I own the organization right now as Chief of Police, therefore what I'm saying is on my back. I have a lot of people helping me keep me upright these days, this command team and the folks around me and many, many other people. But I will tell you unhesitatingly, Chair and Board, The investment that we're going to make now and in the future, financially and otherwise, to address member wellness and morale, will be the best investment you make. We're going to improve our HR and talent processes to better recruit, hire, coach, train, develop, and deploy our members to achieve improved capacity, diversity, and equity in all areas and at all ranks of the organization. And we're going to more effectively employ evidence-based, agile, data-driven strategies to advance modernization, improve performance collectively and individually, reduce risk, and demonstrate both financial and social return on investment. From a financial standpoint, you're going to need to see that these projects are actually delivered on time, on budget, and within scope. From a social standpoint, it has to make people feel better and their lives more enriched as a result of it. And I think both indicators are critical for us to track and demonstrate success on. So those were organizational priorities. Now the operational priorities. We're going to advance neighborhood policing and community partnerships to improve crime prevention, public trust, community safety, and well-being, as well as advance the diversity, equity, and inclusion piece. I want to just break those down a little bit for you. I'm sure you're well aware of it, but just if you could indulge me a little bit. Policing cannot get done, public safety can't get done just without the police. So the community partnerships is critical. You've heard me talk about people in partnerships. They are absolutely in lockstep and reflected in this budget. Improving crime prevention is not a quantitative statement, it's a qualitative statement. It's a commitment, yes, to increase the number of resources dedicated to that, people, money, and time, but qualitatively to put us in a position where we're far more proactive than reactive than we have been. We could suppress crime. We could drive your crime numbers down, Mary. This could be the technically safest city in the world, but your people in the communities don't trust the police as a result of those efforts. And ultimately, that will be a short-term gain that we will lose. So if we don't build trust up while driving crime down, we'll get back to the same place, just in a worse way. So as crime goes down, we must see trust coming up, confidence in policing, confidence in the resources allocated to policing, that they're being spent in ways that, again, produce financial and social return. Community and safety well-being, again, it's not one of those nice-to-have things. It's now legislated under the new Police Service Act. It's a requirement, Mayor, of you and your council and all of your general managers for us to work together collaboratively and collectively, share information, do things different, and achieve differentiated outcomes as a result of it. Early days for every single police agency, municipality, and region. No one's leading the charge, per se. I'd like to see Ottawa at the very front of that parade very quickly. I've had some conversations with the city staff. There's already some things in motion. Again, grateful to Steve Bell for not waiting on this. I think we're in a good position, but it's going to take some focus and attention, and we're going to do some cool things. We're going to use evidence-based, intelligence-led strategies to build capacity, again, to suppress, investigate, and prosecute offenders involved in gun, gang, and drug-related street violence. I can tell you on my brief patrol last Friday, I was involved in gun, gang, and drug-related street violence. As of yesterday, our bikes and beats, combined with our gas squad, arrested the third outstanding suspect for my activities on Friday. I'd like to take full credit for it, but it was faster, smarter, braver, better-looking police officers that arranged most of those great operational results, as well as some very good investigators who are going to make sure the cases are prosecuted effectively. There's no doubt in my mind that there are communities suffering from heightened and disproportionate levels of violence and are being preyed on by people who care little for their children, their elderly parents, and the quality of life in those neighborhoods. We'll do everything we can to keep those places safe. We're going to improve service and safety to underserved and sometimes, as I referenced, over-policed demographic communities. When I say over-policed, I want to be clear about that. There's no intention to go in and hurt community, but in the exuberance and passion and professionalism of officers and units and an entire organization, we can go in and try to make things right and sometimes unintentionally make things less right. And that's what I mean by over-policed. But I do want to focus on our Indigenous community, women, racialized, elderly, youth, as well as persons with mental health and addictions. There's a strong and important voice within our Indigenous First Nations. As I'm learning, there's a strong and important voice in women in the city. Women in my organization have been extremely helpful in helping me to orient around what we need to do within the OPS. And I've met great grandmothers, mothers, aunties, and daughters in the community who've helped me to understand what I've signed on for here in this city. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Jeff Letourneau.
Thank you, Chief. I will now walk you through more detail on the draft budget. This draft budget is in line with the board's direction and provides the necessary operating and capital requirements as identified by Executive Command. Highlights of the draft budget include continuation of the sworn staffing growth plan. This involves an investment of 30 additional officers in community policing, outreach and recruiting, and community development. The budget also leverages provincial funding to add 2 additional officers to our guns and gangs section, enhancing gun suppression efforts. The budget provides funding for the implementation of a permanent equity, diversity, and inclusion office and the implementation of the EDI action plan. The plan focuses on building meaningful culture change within the OPS, strengthening partnerships, and improving community trust and confidence in the service. The budget makes key investments to equip and support our members, including a $4.2 million investment in member wellness programming, continued funding of the modernization roadmap and facility strategic plan, along with investments in our fleet to replace aging vehicles and improvements to the in-car configuration to enhance officer effectiveness. The budget includes a $12.7 million operating requirement, which is funded by a 1.5% assessment growth, along with a 3% increase in the police tax rate, which is in line with the board's direction. $2.2 million in efficiencies and savings are included in this budget. These efficiencies were achieved through the back office integration initiative as directed by the board during the 2019 budget process. These were achieved through internal administrative service improvements and realignments, along with working with the city to leverage administrative services, processes, and technology. The budget also includes continuation of the funding strategy developed with the city, which involves an increase in red light camera revenue of $1.3 million, along with $2.4 million in one-time funding. This one-time funding is enabled by the operating surplus the service is forecasting for 2019. The sworn staffing plan, I'll walk you through the history on the sworn staffing plan now. From 2010 to 2015, there were no increases to the sworn complement. From 2016 to 2019, 105 officers were added to the complement, along with an additional 12 gun violence officers funded through provincial grants. The 2020 budget being tabled today includes an investment of 30 new officers, along with 2 additional gun violence officers funded by the province. The sworn staffing plan included in the forecast includes an investment of 30 additional officers per year for the 2021 to 2023 period. These investments will be made with a focus on improving operational capacity in a way that ensures social and financial returns on investment. The following slide summarizes the details underlying the $12.7 million operating requirement increase and are categorized in accordance with city budget reporting guidelines. Maintaining existing service levels creates an incremental requirement of $10.1 million. Staffing costs make up the majority of this increase and includes a provision for negotiated pay increases, the cost of members moving through their salary steps, and members qualifying for various levels of responsibility pay. Other drivers of this line are inflation on materials and supplies, pay-as-you-go reserve contribution increases for fleet replacement and facility strategic plan. Also included in this category is the red light camera funding, along with the one-time funding from the city. The 30-officer growth plan creates a $4.4 million requirement. This includes the compensation costs of the officers as they are hired over the course of the year, along with the cost of uniforms, equipment, vehicles, and training to properly equip them. Also included is the annualized compensation costs of the growth officers hired in 2019. The budget includes a pay-as-you-go increase of $1.3 million to fund the modernization roadmap, partially offset by $800,000 in operating expense savings from the program for a net increase of $500,000. The budget includes $2.2 million in efficiencies, which are achieved through the back office integration initiative, which I discussed earlier. User fees have been adjusted by $100,000 in line with the board's user fee policy as well. This summarizes the $12.7 million operating budget increase, and this increase is funded by the assessment growth of 1.5% and the police tax rate increase of 3%. This slide highlights, provides an overview of the gross operating budget by type of expense. The gross operating budget is $362 million. Revenue of $42.9 leaves a net operating budget of $319.2 million. The gross budget can be broken down as follows. Compensation makes up the majority at 82%. Materials, supplies, and services at 8%, financial charges of 7%, and costs with the city make up the remainder of 3%, and those costs are related to city functions such as facilities and fleet maintenance, legal and procurement as well. This next slide identifies some of the key numbers for the 2020 budget all on one slide. Some of these I've mentioned already, but the budget increase is $12.7 million. The net operating budget of $319.2. These are funded by an assessment growth of 1.5% and a police tax rate increase of 3%, and the resulting impact on the tax increase of the average household would be an $18 increase, bringing the total police tax cost for the average household to $625 for 2020. I'll now move on to the forecast. As part of the annual budget process and based on a recommendation from the city's Auditor General, the OPS does provide a 3-year forecast for information purposes. This forecast is based on trends and known information at the time. The forecast maintains the sworn staffing growth plan of 30 officers per year. It includes continuation of the back office integration initiative with additional efficiencies in 2021 of $1 million, and reflects a police tax rate range increase of between 3.3% and 4%. I'll now move on to capital. The OPS capital budget aims to provide an adequate capital envelope to ensure that assets such as fleet, facilities, and information technology are replaced as required to ensure effective police operations. For 2020, the draft capital budget request is $35 million. The capital budget is broken down into 3 categories. Renewal of assets totals $11.1 million and consists of investments in fleet replacement, IT infrastructure and telecom, and facilities lifecycle. Growth investments total $17 million and include the final amounts for the construction of the South Building. Strategic initiatives total $6.9 million and include investments to fund the modernization roadmap, facility and security initiatives, along with costs to support the sworn officer growth in 2020. And in terms of funding, the 2020 capital budget will be funded from an almost even split of pay-as-you-go reserve funding and debt. The 10-year capital requirement is estimated at $260 million and ranges from a high of $43 million in 2025 to a low of $16 million in 2026. Renewal of assets consumes over half the amount and is funded entirely from pay-as-you-go funding, along with a small share of revenue from the sale of assets. The growth category is $31 million and includes the final construction amounts for the South Building, land costs, along with specialty fit-up costs. And the strategic initiatives category is $97 million. The largest project within the 10-year time frame is a new Central Patrol facility, which is estimated to cost $43 million. Funding for this category will come from debt and pay-as-you-go reserves. Moving on to the timetable, the 2020 draft budget is being considered and tabled this morning with the board and city council. A Finance and Audit Committee meeting is scheduled for November 14th, where public delegations are welcome. The board will receive further delegations, consider, review, and approve the budget at the November 25th board meeting, and City Council will consider, review, and approve the budget on December 11th. That concludes the presentation. Before opening for questions, I would just like to take a moment to recognize the efforts of the finance team, the quick work by the team to fix the presentation earlier. I appreciate that, gentlemen. In terms of the team, Kathy Murray, John Sweet, Sheila Hamilton, Val McCallum, and Owen Bell, along with Heather Fisher and Catherine Knott from an admin support perspective, played a significant role in getting us to this point. Further to this, I would just like to take a moment to recognize Wally Salem, our Manager of Finance. Wally's sitting at the table here in front of us. This will be Wally's last budget with the OPS, as he plans to retire in January after a 34-year career.
I'm not sure I'm ready to let him go yet, but...
Not sure you have a choice. I'd like to thank Wally for his significant contributions to OPS over his career, and also personally thank him for all his support, especially helping me on board to the OPS 3 years ago. Congratulations, Wally. You'll definitely be missed. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Chief. I think, as the Chief said, you're only 8 days into the job. It seems probably like a lifetime already. I really want to thank you, and I want to add thanks to Deputy Chief Steve Bell as well. Obviously, I know I've been at dozens of these meetings leading up to this. This has been a very intensive process, and I want to thank Jeff because I know he and his finance team, and I'd like to add my congratulations to your coming retirement. Hope you really enjoy it. It'll be a little less pressure, I'm sure, than this has been. Highlighted that I think I want to comment on, just your comment about the member wellness. I think we've made it very clear from a board perspective that this is something we support, and we're completely dedicated to making sure that the resources are there to ensure member wellness. So I really want to highlight that. Also, I'm glad you mentioned pop per pop. I know I looked at the chart. The first thing that hit me is there's actually an inverse relationship between, for instance, they have one of the lowest cop per pop ratios on the chart, and yet have one of the best crime severity index indicators, and that's something that we've heard loud and clear from the public that they're concerned about, is crime severity. And yet when I look at, say, Edmonton or Winnipeg, they have one of the highest cop per pops, yet they have a much higher crime severity index. So I'll be looking forward to a more robust discussion about this at the FAC meeting. And also, I think one of the other points you mentioned was trust, and I think that that is what this is all about. We absolutely must build trust with the community. So thank you once again, and I think I'll turn it over now to my fellow board members for questions. Mayor Watson.
Thank you, and congratulations to all who've been involved in the budget, and thank you for your cooperative working relationship with the city. And our treasurer is also retiring in January. I guess that's the time when fiscal years are over. The treasurers and the finance folks can leave with a great career. Thank you very much for your service for over 3 decades. Can you give me an update on the south facility? You have 16.5 million set aside. Obviously, it's going to be more than that. What's the timeline, and is it going to be a pay-as-you-go and debt financed project?
Yes, thank you, through the chair. So this is the final installment in terms of the funding for the south building. The total building cost will be around $105 million. It's expected, occupancy is expected in 2022, and we've currently passed the 66% completion as part of the process, and we'd be looking at tendering for construction early in 2020.
And will the city be borrowing on your behalf because
Yes.
we get a better rate?
Yes, the city always borrows on our behalf.
Okay. On the issue of paid duty, that brings revenue in to both the officer and to the service. Approximately how much is brought in by paid duty to the police service?
In terms of revenue, the budget is approximately $6 million in terms of revenue.
Okay. Do you operate with the city's spec market on gasoline, or do you have your own gas contract?
We have a contract with Esso, but we also leverage the city's fuel depots. And in 2020, one of the challenges with leveraging the city's depots is most of them are diesel. But in 2020, we worked with the city treasurer and the fleet department and had 2 large ethanol tanks installed, one in the west end and one in the east end. And we're leveraging, we typically buy, in the past, about 5 to 10% of our fuel is used through city depots, with about 90% with Esso, and we're looking at the optimal range there. One of the issues that we have is just the location. Right. And so if we have to drive further to get to a city depot, it doesn't make any sense. So having both options is currently what we're looking at leveraging going forward. And
do you go out to tender on the gas contract every couple of years? How long has Esso been operational? Can we work a better deal?
Yeah, so we haven't gone to tender since I've been in office. I can go back and I can answer that question for you, when the last time that contract was tendered.
maybe we should look into that, because gas is such a commodity up and down. It could be a way of saving. You know, you use a lot of gasoline, obviously. I noticed it's rare to see a police car anymore. I see police SUVs. I'm assuming an SUV costs more than a car. Is it an issue because you now have to carry so much equipment that the cars are not sufficient? Is there a new policy that we're just buying SUVs? You know, what's the cost differential in terms of an SUV's gas bill versus a sedan?
So the fuel economy difference isn't material. There is a slight higher cost for the SUVs, a few $1,000s per vehicle. However, Ford no longer makes a police-rated sedan.
Right.
Really the only option for us from a sedan perspective is the Dodge Charger. And we have a patrol advisory group that works with our fleet team. And the Charger is a small vehicle. And so the recommendations from our frontline and our patrol group with our fleet team was to go forward with the Explorers.
Chief, I've had the pleasure of getting into one of those cars with my new gear. I'm 5'11". I used to be 6 foot. I don't know what happened to the other inch. And I could barely squeeze into that thing, and I was not carrying the full range of options that most of our officers are. And there's a few officers that you've hired in the last little while, Chair, that are a little bigger than me. So there is a significant wellness comfort factor, the ability for them to put their seatbelts on to keep themselves safe, get out on time to execute an operational activity. And I'm sure the people sitting around me could give you a lot more examples, but this is a significant issue around the office that most of our frontline people occupy.
That's a fair point. Final question is, we reached an upload agreement on court security, and the total cost was finalized in 2018. What are the savings, and are we actually saving any money as a result of the upload, that we don't need as many constables? We have special constables, for instance. Is there a way of continuing to reduce that, or does it not matter because the court or the province pays the bill you send them, or is there a cap?
Well, there is a grant. The grant was increased last year, but it's in line with our costs.
Okay.
And so that is something that we do look at on an annual basis as part of the budget process.
So the province is keeping up with inflationary costs?
Yes.
On an annual basis?
Yes.
Okay, that's great. Anyways, it's a very good roadmap, and thank you very much for, Chief. I know we've got you diving in the deep end in less than a week, but I think this is a very progressive document, and as the Chair said, I think your emphasis on wellness will go over very well with the officers and the greater community. So congratulations, Jeff.
Thank you very much.
Chief, and I know Steve did a lot of the heavy lifting until you got here, and to your staff, my sincere congratulations. Alors, félicitations à tous les personnes qui sont responsables pour cette budget, et merci pour votre coopération avec les fonctionnaires de la Ville d'Ottawa et vos collègues ici à le service de police. Merci.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Mayor. Member Norman.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to you, Jeff, Steve, and Chief, for a nice presentation. I have a quick question to the Jeff first and next to the Chief. On page 10, you have described efficiencies of 2.2 million, which is due to the back office integration. So that efficiencies of 2.2 will be reflected in 2020 budget, or will be spread in different years?
These will all be realized in 2020.
So then I must congratulate you for this, bringing these efficiencies to the budget.
Thank you.
Next is to the Chief. Chief, we will be hiring 30 officers per year. So are we dedicating some of the officers to the community policing, or that is one area which is lacking? It is important to bridge the gaps between the community and the police.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, in this year's deployment, we're looking at adding 2 additional neighborhood response teams. And so directly at the pointy end of the spear for our community policing strategy. In addition, we're going to be, through provincial grants, bringing in guns and gangs officers. So we'll both have the proactive piece, where the majority of that investment will go, as well as the reactive piece. There are other outreach positions which we're staffing as well, which will bridge us into the community. And so the majority of that deployment will go to, as you would describe, community policing, to build trust, suppress crime, and integrate with the other city departments around community safety and well-being, getting at those undercurrents that cause crime in the first place.
Thanks, Chief, and thank you all.
Can I just make one more comment? It may be self-evident, but phase one of the efficiencies produced that number, but we're not resting on our laurels. Jeff is already looking at what we can do in the future, and there's some ideas that we're going to be putting forward, obviously through the process chair. But every year we'll look for a substantive number proven through an evidence-based approach to efficiencies.
Thank you.
Thank you, Member Norman. Member Blaustein?
First of all, thank you. Wonderful reports. My question pertains to PDC. Our training facilities, we have very limited access, and they're not in the greatest of shape. So I'm wondering if we're looking at investing any money into better training facilities so that we have further access. Right now, we've got limited time access, and it's creating a bit of a backlog from my understanding, and I'm wondering if we have any, looking at any investment in that.
Thank you. We are, in 2020, we'll begin the process of updating our facility strategic plan, and included in that, we'll be looking at our training facility and PDC.
For them to remain where they are we looking at perhaps putting training facilities in the south building?
I think we'll look at all options. It'll be a full review in terms of what our future needs are, future requirements are, looking at the current state, and we'll be evaluating all options. The south campus was one of the ideas, potential ideas for where it could go. I don't want to presuppose and bias the review, but that is an option.
Thank you. My other question is, once the south building is open, we're just for long-term planning, I believe we're looking at potentially closing a couple of the other buildings. That create some more efficiencies?
Yes, so two of the buildings, our current buildings, are slated to close. Greenbank would be returned to the city for disposal, and the Leitrim station would be closed as well.
So we'd be
Correct.
saving some money.
We'd be saving some money in terms of operating costs, and that has all been factored into our longer-term forecasts.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Blaustein. Any other questions? No further questions? Okay. The report recommendations are that the Ottawa Police Services Board receive and table the Ottawa Police Service 2020 draft operating and capital budgets. 2, that the Finance and Audit Committee discuss the 2020 budget proposal at its meeting of November the 14th, 2019. 3, that the Ottawa Police Services Board consider and approve the 2020 draft operating and capital budgets at the board meeting on November 25th, 2019. 4, that the Ottawa Police Services Board returns $4.0 million to the General Capital Reserve Fund from Capital Order 908707, Queensview 2. 5, that the Ottawa Police Services Board approve the delegation of authority to the Chief of Police to execute and administer the 2020 Fleet Replacement Program up to a maximum of $4.6 million. Is this carried? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That was an excellent report, and I think, unless there's something else, I'll call for adjournment. Thank you. And thank you.
That's good. Thank you, Steve. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you. Congrats, Chief.
Thank you. Congrats to you.
Don't take off on me now. He starts moving. Yes.